And welcome to the International Mentoring Community, all things mentoring lounge, where we have conversations about mentoring, mentors, mentee, and mentorship. I'm Stephen Hobbs. Doug Lawrence has joined me. We'll introduce ourselves in a few minutes, but I just want to go over what's the topic for today. And what we have is why you struggle with holistic and reciprocal mentoring. 5 truths. We have had a couple of conversations with people, and what's been happening is that they've sort of been hinting at obstacles, rabbit holes, falling into ditches, whatever you want to call it, around the use of the word like holistic and reciprocal, because we've just added that into the mix of how we're looking at mentoring, because we're always up-leveling, upskilling ourselves in this world of mentoring, our wise practice, our inspired standards. And so people have been asking us just to explain a little bit more. So we then said to them, well, what kind of obstacles or struggles have you been having? We've got quite a few. We picked out 5 that we thought we would share today, and that's where we're going. So in essence, we're going to sort of talk about the struggle and then sort of reverse engineer it. Sort of, okay, if this is something that's hindering us, what can we do to help ourselves? So it's that kind of a mix that we're looking at today. But as we always do, we like to do a quick intro because not everyone knows who we are or who's the International Mentoring Community that is sponsoring this. So Doug and I will introduce ourselves. And then I'll have Doug just share our definition that we work with. So Doug, you want to just introduce yourself first and your role with IMC?
I sure can. So I'm Doug Lawrence, and I'm one of the co-founders of the International Mentoring Community, and I am the Director of Practice and Outreach.
And you have a very deep practice through your organization called?
Talent Seed.
Yeah. So if you're looking for a deep practice, how to do things, or looking for a mentor, Doug is a great person to have a conversation with. You can always find him through IMC, the International Mentoring Community, which we co-founded. I take up the role of Director of Certification and Verification. So I'm the one who makes sure that of all the things that you've done and the evidence you're presenting and you're seeking certification, I'm the one who can assist you. Doug is sort of meets you at the beginning, helps you get on the pathway, gets you along where the education is necessary. And what we do is we help you out through this sort of community configuration that we have created. So Doug, you want to share our initial definition of mentoring? We are actually going to be updating that through July and incorporating more of the words of holistic and reciprocal, but we'll share with you where it actually places itself in the definition. So you want to share, Doug?
Yeah, I sure can. So as it stands today, the definition that we're using is mentoring is a two-way trusted relationship where the mentor and mentee learn and develop together through personal and professional development.
So the reciprocal part is the
two-way trusted relationship.
Yeah, the two-way, and the holistic gets at the end of it, which is about
the personal and professional development.
Yeah. So we will be reframing, getting those words in there. But what we're attempting to do is highlight this notion of, if you're going to put an adjective or an adverb in front of mentoring or be a mentor, holistic and reciprocal seem to be a really great pair of adjectives. And mentoring holistically, reciprocally, if you want to go into adverbs, all right, playing with words. So we thought that we would weave those into the definition, and we will be bringing greater clarity to that as we move along. But in today's presentation, which is looking at those struggles around moving into this type of mentoring, and type is sort of a misnomer, and I'd like to bring forward is that people keep saying, well, is this a type of mentoring? Well, mentoring is mentoring, but the descriptors of adjectives or adverbs you place in front of it tend to give it a bit more of a time and location to it. There are people who use words like youth mentoring, intergenerational mentoring, right? And other terms like that. What we're attempting to do is just say that mentoring, yes, is holistic and reciprocal. We'll use those adjectives to go with it. But what we're also speaking about is sort of this wider, deeper, richer perspective of mentoring. Would that be fair, Doug, in terms of a summary?
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over these 5 struggles with you. There's a little presentation that will pop up, and then Doug and I will chat about different things and then bring some examples into play as we move through. So the first one that we're going to go over is the struggle of this lack of clear expectations. And ways to counter it is to establish clear goals, set boundaries, and regular check-ins. These are ways in which we're going to chat about it today. So this notion of the lack of clear expectations. Now, this is a really interesting one for me because there's a difference between an expectation and a commitment or a promise. Expectations to me are sort of estimates. I estimate, there's an estimation, an expectation that you'll have something to you by the end of the week. Commitment, promise would be is you'll have it by Thursday at noon. And what happens sometimes is we start to use expectations like commitments, and then they don't make it. The promise doesn't feel like it's being kept. And that's why this lack of clear expectations, it would be more of, if we actually flipped it around, is ensure commitments is another way of looking at this. And that's why by establishing these clear goals or outcomes is another word that I would use there, and set the boundaries and establish regular check-ins. If you do those kind of activities and you think about it through the lens of commitment promise keeping rather than estimates and expectations, and you have that language come forward from you as a mentor with your mentee, and vice versa, all right, then it becomes a much better place, right? A much better space in which to do your mentoring. And when we talk about the clear goals, is the goals that come forward because of your conversation with the mentee. Now, you as a mentor, when you first started up, there's certain outcomes that you want, and you're going to have discussion about that. And that could be time and place for the meetings, right? Do you or do you not use an agenda? These kind of, the administrative kind of tasks. But as time goes by, is always being clear about goals, outcomes that you're working with. The setting the boundaries is sort of like bracketing the time together. So if you are together, you're putting a boundary around that. Now, for some people, the boundary might be, okay, we're going to meet 3 times. Someone might be, we're going to meet for 3 months. Someone might be, it's open-ended. Let's see what happens. Maybe we'll become great friends. Again, it's things to be thinking about, but don't assume the goals and the boundaries. As a mentor, do not assume. If you have to err to the side of doing more clarifying the goals and setting the boundaries at first until you get the sort of a rhythm, a mentoring rhythm, and your relationship and structure starts to work together, which is why regular check-ins is such an important piece to this, because if you don't check in, right, on a regular basis and connect with your mentee about what's happening and what's not happening, and for you to do the same with them about, hey, this isn't quite working the way that I thought. Can we just do a check-in here? Something's a little off, right? Or something like that. Then this is what we mean about, if there isn't the clear expectations, then move it to, well, then let's get into commitment and promise keeping. And then let's use this clear goals, set the boundaries, regular check-ins becomes really important in terms of, let me use the word framing, the way in which you're going to be meeting. Do you have any examples, follow-up, or anything that would help people out here, Doug?
The one thing that sort of comes to mind for me is with every time I meet with, probably not every time, but the majority of the times that I'll meet with somebody, one of my first questions is, what does mentoring mean to you as a mentee? And sort of get an understanding of that. And then from there, ask the question, what are some of the, as a result of what you've just said, what are some of the outcomes that you're looking for as a mentee that we can customize how we're going to work together so that it fulfills or meets the needs that you're stating, as far as, these are the things I hope to take away from each meeting, and these are, some outcomes or some goals that I want to work towards.
Yeah, it's sort of this notion of action outcomes. This is something that's really important to us within the IMC. And what we're doing is, think of it this way. At one end is define, in the middle is discuss, on the other end is evaluate. So if you're going to have a conversation, sometimes it may just be in the world of define. Sometimes it might be in discuss, which is, okay, there's concepts here and there's some practices here. Can we just have a discussion about that? I'm not quite sure which way to go. Evaluate means I have been doing it, I've managed it, I'm leading it, I'm demonstrating it. So let's evaluate to see, if do I keep doing it? Do I improve it? Do I focus it? Do I strengthen? So sometimes when we're in this conversation that Doug is chatting about, is knowing, are we in the concepts world of define, discuss, or are we in the action world of discuss and evaluate, so that we understand the kind of conversation we're having at that point in time. And it becomes particularly important as a mentor with a mentee is to know where you are, because you might be thinking you're having a dialogue about the notion of evaluate, and they're still back there trying to define what's going on. and then you wonder, why are we meeting the goals? What's going on? I'm at a bit of a struggle here. You'll hear words like that that'll pop out. Does that seem fair enough, Doug?
Yes, it does.
Okay, so let's look at the next one. And what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at this notion of the difficulty of maintaining balance. Now, balance in the sense of not the weigh scales, all right, is if you put so much gold on one side, you're going to get so much money on the other side. They're sort of that equivalent. It's more about the dynamic balancing, right? The notion of having a balanced off is not realistic in how we interact with one another. And therefore, how do you foster the reciprocity? So you'll notice why we're using reciprocal with mentoring, right? Being open, this notion of equality and working with that. So these are the kind of things that we want to take a look at now. And this notion of maintaining balance, as I mentioned, not this weigh scales of gold to money that you're going to get more. Okay, they're dynamic, they're moving, but not to the point where they become a complete pendulum swing. But how do you get things moving back and forth? So if you, as a mentor, let me use a really striking example, is you and a mentor go, you must be there 1 minute earlier than when the meeting starts so that we can get set up. You may have to play with that a little bit, all right? It may not work every time, and that's why once you get to know your mentee, they may be saying, well, I've got to come from the other side of the building to get here, and depending on the elevators, and I am leaving, 7 minutes ahead, and if they arrive, on time, is that a big deal? If they arrive 10 minutes beyond time, that might be a big deal. And then that's when you'd have to have a conversation about that. And that's why it's the reciprocity, helping each other. It's two-way. You will learn from your mentee, right, Doug?
Yes, you will.
You will learn from your mentee. And then sometimes that mentee may actually become your mentor, right? There may be a little mirror reflection coming back. I had that the other night. I was helping someone along, and all of a sudden I went, "Oh, hang on a minute, something's going on here. Look at what's taking place." And I had to thank the mentee for helping me understand something about what was happening for me. So it was really great from that perspective. Being open, and open in the sense of perspectives and experiences. Like, you can't close yourself off and say this is the only way in which to look at it. You have to open it up and see what's going on. And this notion of equality, the person that's with you, it's collaboration. They're a collaborator. All right. Doug mentioned in the definition, two-way. You have to remember that when you're in your conversations. And the mentee is not a subordinate. I appreciate in some workplaces you may be asked to mentor someone on your team, but you've got to sort of take that away and say, okay, here's mentor mentee. What does that mean? Reframe that for yourself and not think of it as this is someone that's one step below me or something. You've got to look at it. This is someone who wants to tap into my lived experience. I want to interact on, or they've asked to interact with me. But don't look at it through the lens of being a subordinate, because that could take you down a very greasy path, slippery path, and it may not be fun if you're heading down that direction. So this notion of difficulty and maintaining balance is reframe what balance means. It's not to get it so that it's rigorous, and this is how it is. It's more finding that way in which to move with that person using these ideas. Doug, any suggestions, add tos,
Yeah,
examples?
the one that sort of, as you were talking, that kind of jumped out for me was the aspect of the individual being asked to mentor one of his or her direct reports, so to speak. Um, when that happens, what I usually do is suggest or recommend that we take the step back and we reestablish what our goals actually are. So what is it that this person wants or is desirous of obtaining? And it may very well be that it's a coaching relationship and not a mentoring relationship. And so
True.
then I need to go to some of my coaching colleagues and say, here is somebody that could benefit from some work. I still own the relationship as the mentor, but I will bring that coach in to help us facilitate or get to a place where we can address the actual goals a little bit better.
Yeah, and that's really important, is knowing when you shift your educating approach. So if you were mentoring and you're shifting to something else, how far can you go with that before it really someone else should get involved?
Yeah.
I think that's what you're mentioning here. I think the same thing applies to counseling, doesn't it? If you're helping mentor someone in a mental health situation, you want to share a little bit about that one?
Well, it's much the same sort of thing, other than with mentoring and counseling or psychology or psychiatrists or all of those, that you need to, as a mentor, you need to know where that line in the sand is, and you don't want to cross it. So you want to be able to uh, make sure that you understand what the mentee's needs actually are, and look for any signs or triggers that are going to tell you that, oops, we have somebody who may be struggling with depression or post-traumatic stress or going through grief of some sort. So I need to understand where we are. And then it's not up to me to prescribe or I can't even think of the word, but it's not up to me to prescribe any medication or anything like that, which I can't. But I do need to be able to suggest or refer to a more professional resource, whether that's a counselor, a social worker, a psychologist, a psychiatrist, any one of those that's where we need to get this person to, if, when you stumble across that.
Yeah, and it's just important to understand. We talk about there's lines with mentoring. There's certain lines. If you're going to cross over, then you've got to declare you've moved. So you can go from mentoring to coaching. It's possible. You can go mentoring into facilitating. It's possible. Mentoring into counseling. Ooh, that's a real that's a line you got to really pay attention to. You don't slip into that. And we talk about that through. There's 12 educating approaches that I've written about, that we often chat about when we're doing workshops and things like that. So just to be alert of that as time goes by, okay? So this notion of the third one, I think, is important because it sort of plays off of the other ones as well. And it's people struggle with ineffective communication. And I think it's because of the way they're listening, the way they're having a dialogue, and their use of giving some ideas in return to the person in conversation. So I like to unpack this just a little bit more. So the notion of communication here is that communication is really about this level of commonness that allows you to enter into being together, that allows you to get to action. And so in some cases, communication is you're sort of coordinating the behavior of the other person. So as a mentor, in communication with the mentee, there's a certain coordination of behavior, and the response the mentee is giving back, or the questions the mentee is giving back to you, is the same thing, coordinating your behavior. So we've got to appreciate that. So the notion here is the listening that you're going to be using. Now, a lot of people use the word active listening, which is a great term. All right, listening, I need to be active in it. In other words, it's reciprocal. But Doug and I sat down one day and we said, is it that, or is it something a little bit more? And we said, yes, it is active listening, yes, but it's consciously active listening, because there's sometimes people appear to be actively listening, but they're still thinking about some other stuff. They may not be consciously there, being present with you, with the mentee. Now, there's sometimes in reflection, you may need to pop over, pick up something. I'm picking something up, figure out, come back. But there's sometimes people will just sort of nod their head and think, well, I'm actively listening. I'm giving clues that I'm actively listening, but they may be thinking of something completely different. Consciously nodding your head and responding and being there. That's what we're talking about, and not escaping off to some other place. This notion of the dialogue, I think, is important as well. So if you're listening and then the dialogue you're having, dialogue actually means meaning flowing through. So it's reciprocal, it's back and forth, it's holistic in its intention. But here's the one that I think what really creeps in, all right, and this notion of ineffective communication is a lot of time we use a word like feedback, which suggests I'm going to go back into something that happened, I'm going to make comment about it and see if that helps the person. So it's sort of like feedback is going into the history of what took place. And someone might go, well, remember when we were talking about this last week, okay? Versus feed forward, where you're picking it up in the moment. Remember I said, you may have to pop up, do a little reflection, do a little adjustment. What's going on here? What can I do to bring forward? And it's the feed forward is to be able to talk about what's going on here, or here's a suggestion. What do you think? It's feed forward as though I'm working with the present to move things forward towards the future. So I really clue in when someone says, I've got some feedback for you. I go, okay, hang on a minute. How far are we going back? Because a lot of things have shifted probably since then, all right? And then I might say, okay, give it to me, but I have to look at what's happening. But if someone says to me while we're in dialogue, Have you thought about this, or then I'm going, okay, here's some feed forward that's coming, and I can take a look at it. So again, it clues me in a little bit differently about what's taking place. Any thoughts, Doug?
Well, one of the things that sort of stands out for me, and we've talked about this as well, is the idea of with active listening, with it being described of or being described as a process where I am listening and I'm hearing. So it's the two, it's listening and hearing what the other person is saying. So when you use the two conversation, so I have a conversation with my mentee, we're talking about something, we're talking about A, and I'm in the conversation, but I'm also over here having a conversation as well, where that's going to be something that I can feed into what we were already talking about. So there's that part. The other part is, and this is probably more of a tool than anything else, is when it comes to effective communication, it's your ability as a mentor to storytell, and how important that is to be able to. And I find that with even with the mental health piece, that if I'm able to share some of my own experiences that I've had with, mental health, with post-traumatic stress, with grief, dealing with, all of those things, if the feedback that I am getting is that because I'm more relatable to the mentee because I'm able to storytell and not necessarily say, well, if you do this, this is, especially with mental health, that if you do this, this is what's going to happen. You're going to be healed and all that sort of stuff. That's not, certainly not even on the agenda of the conversation. It's more so about sharing your experiences that you've had so that people can relate better to you.
Yeah, so in some ways, what that story sharing is you're actually asking a person to pop in and almost be the character with you in the story, and then you can ask them about, well, what happened with that story for you? What difference?
Yeah, the storytelling, story sharing is definitely something that you need to be able to kind of focus in on.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that feed forward is really important, right? You couldn't, yeah, yeah. So let's move on and let's take a look at the next one. And the next one is about this notion of the lack of cultural competence. Now, not often I use the word competence in when we're sharing about mentoring, but in this case, it is about truly understanding the cultural aspect of whatever it is that you're looking at. And for me, culture is about the human interactions and the artifacts that result from those interactions. And this notion of conversations, communication, setting up the boundaries, all of that, these are all elements of the culture that happens in that mentoring arrangement between you and the mentee. There is a culture that sort of comes up. You both bring your context, but there's a culture that's being set up. And then there's a wider culture that the mentee is bringing in, because if they're going to learn what they're going to learn, it has a ripple effect into other aspects of their life, whether it's workplace or homes or family or things like that. So it's important that you as a mentor, in terms of getting this cultural competence, is to educate yourself, show this notion of respect and appreciation, and certainly encourage diversity. So let me just offer up a couple of thoughts here, and then I'll just ask Doug to jump in here. Okay. The first thing is, I'm actually going to reverse it in terms of encourage diversity. Diversity in ideas, insights that you share, being open to the conversations about coming from different perspectives, using thought experiments, right? Storytelling, story sharing, finding ways in which to look at something. So if the mentee asks you question A, you could answer it with answer A, but maybe what might be more beneficial is to use something like A1, A2, A3, A4, look at different ways of looking at it and help the mentee come to understand it. Which means that you're going to be showing respect and appreciation. And respect here is, I have me, and I think I can speak for Doug, and he'll say so. We have deep respect for mentees. Anyone that comes up to us, right, or gets a hold of us and says, I got some questions for you, I'd love to ask those of you. They may not use the word mentor, but in your mind, head, heart, and hands, or head, heart, and hands kind of idea, you're going, they're mentor, they're a mentee. I appreciate it. I respect, I admire you to come and ask that of me. And therefore, I am not going to quash that down unless I know I may not be able to help them. But in that case, who else can I get them involved with, right? But I respect the mentee and the time that they give. And therefore, I'm going to do everything I can to educate myself about who that mentee is, where the question's coming from, what's this time about, and the culture in which it's taking place, and the context that the mentee is bringing forward. Thoughts on that one, Doug?
Well, I know for me, the whole aspect of the cultural sensitivity, the cultural competence, in a lot of cases that I, as the mentor, need to understand, the mentee whereabouts, what's the culture like from where they came from, all of that, especially when you're dealing with international clients and stuff that you're providing mentoring and stuff to. Because what ends up happening in a lot of cases is that if I'm exploring what the root cause of the behavior is, that in some cases it could very well be that this was the acceptable norm from where this individual migrated from. So they may be, say, from Pakistan, for example, or from India. And one of the ones I know, because I've dealt with this personally, is the organization was struggling with dealing with an employee who was somewhat abrupt and aggressive in their behavior with their coworkers. As an example, they would go to greet them in the morning, to say, good morning, how are you today? And give them a solid smack across the back. And, it was startling, and they didn't quite know how to, so they didn't quite know how to deal with it. So they came forward and said, this employee is hitting me, and I don't like that sort of thing. And so what we ended up doing was we did we got a better understanding of the culture, and was able to determine that this was the root cause of the behavior. And then I had the conversation with the employee to say, so help me understand. And I went from there, and we were able to get him to see both sides, and get the other employee who made the complaint, get them to see as well, that if you could have a conversation, you'd be a lot further ahead.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, great example. I always remember this, and this is because of work around the world. Even though I speak English and I interact with a lot of others who come from countries that their primary is English, but some it might be secondary, tertiary. The words that I use don't always go across the same way, even though someone else. So I always remember the differentiation between cool, cold, hot, warm, and what that all means. It's all relative. So I learned early on is, don't go in thinking that the language I'm going to use, people use the same way. That is that is a hole you don't want to trip and fall into. All right. And from a mentoring point of view, now that we have things like the Zoom and Google Meets and other ways, we're opening up the opportunities to share insights with people all over the world. And I think this also pertains to the next one that we want to take a look at, because you as a mentor, if you're not being a mentee somehow, somewhere along the way, then you may be missing a point. And what I'm attempting to get at is people struggle because they overlook the need for continuous learning. There's a lot of mentors that I've interacted with that go, well, I have all this lived experience and that's what I'm going to share. And then I say to them, well, are you updating, up-leveling, upskilling your own? He's, no, I don't need to. I'll just share what I know. And I go, oh, that's great. That's great. And then in today's world, all right, just even the last month or so, have you used any of this AI stuff? Have you used any of the way of writing? Have you learned how to do drawings and all that? No, I don't need to worry about that. Oh, really? Okay. Doug and I have conversation. We had conversation before we came on. All right. How important these kind of, okay, how do we up level? How do we upskill? How do we do this? So from a mentor point of view, you've got to become a mentee at times and continuous your learning. So it is lifelong, and you've got to seek dialogue with other mentors. All right. Or how do I shift let me ask my mentee to mentor me. And sometimes they call that intergenerational. They've used other terms in the workplaces where someone's younger and they offer to someone who may have a few more revolutions around the sun under their belt, and they're wanting to learn something about from a generational learning point of view, is opening that up. But if you're not staying updated, you're not in that mode, that could come back to kick your butt, because when you're having a conversation with your mentee and you can almost see the mentee going, what are you talking about? That's gone, isn't it? Like, we're doing something else now. Like, I've gone through just about everything. I actually remember, and this is the only story I'll share and it'll be really quick. I remember the day I was taken into a workshop and they said, you need to learn about this because this is how your students are going to interact with you. And I said, well, what's it called? Oh, it's called email. What's that? Well, it's electronic mail. What's electronic mail? Well, you're going to learn about it. Oh, okay. And we went through it and I went, I don't know if I want this. Let them just come and knock on my door. Okay. That was when I was, doing some college related work. And I learned all about that. And, think about, oh, wow. Fax machines. I have to learn how to use a fax machine, but that went out pretty quickly. So, there's things like this. As a mentor, you've got to stay in the world of updating, upskilling, up-leveling. Thoughts, Doug?
No, I agree. And there's mentoring is being embraced as it's almost like it's an evolution of something that we talk a lot about but don't really understand the value from personal and from a business perspective. And now we're starting to see what mentoring can actually do for us, with us. It's so important in order for you to be able to stay, kind of ride the train, or ride the crest of the wave. The only way you're going to be able to do that is if you have a continuous learning plan that you're going to be able to put things into place for yourself to keep on a fine tuning and tweaking your skill sets, which is going to enhance your mentoring practice.
Yeah, I can't remember the name, Chesterton or Chestermans or something, but what this sort of thought line was, don't destroy something you don't understand.
Yeah.
Right? And some people might go, well, ChatGPT is just a fad or something that's coming through. So in a sense, they're destroying it, but don't do that. It's better for you to understand it because it's going through all of its different iterations to sort of see what might happen, coming out the other side of it. It's sort of like, well, we don't need to create hybrid workplaces anymore. Well, something happened here in 19, right, and 20 that shifted our whole framing of what that looks like. And I know it's had a ripple effect in a lot of different ways, right? But the notion is, don't try and destroy something you don't understand. Understand it. And as a mentor, staying on top of what it is that you're doing. And I'm just going to use an example here. On LinkedIn, there's a lot of people for some reason are reaching out to me trying to sell me on getting my project management professional designation. It's like, just everyone is sending me these messages. I'm going, someone must have let a whole bunch of salespeople loose or something, because, and then I'm going, okay, project management, have I updated myself in terms of my understanding of it? And I went, well, I'm not going to go get my designation because I'm not a project manager. But let me just go and reread some things and remind myself of flow charts. And then I went, how do I use project management using something like Chat GPT? So all of a sudden I just, oh, hang on. And I just sort of bing, and then, well, how do I use mentoring, project management, Chat GPT? So I've been playing around a little bit with it as well. So that's what I mean. That's the story, is the upstill and upskill and keep it going. So I think I think we've covered that off, Doug. Do you think so?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, and we're a little past the 40-minute mark, so let's start looking at closing down here. So again, I would encourage you, if you found this of interest or you've been listening in to the recording to this conversation, please comment, share, subscribe, ring the bell to get updates about what's going on. This is going on quite a few channels, YouTube channels, and into Facebook. So please share away so that people can benefit from this. These are 5 struggles and the 5 truths that go with it. We've identified more. We might actually do another video on some of the other struggles and truths, and we certainly welcome your comments about what we've had to say. Maybe you have a great example. Maybe we can weave that in. Maybe we can invite you to get involved and come in and have a chat with us for 5 minutes. That would be great as well. So there's lots of ways in which to interact with us. Again, if you're looking at certification, you're new to mentoring, and you really want to get a deep, rich view of it, then we certainly recommend the certification. If you're seasoned and you want to get the certification, that's great. We certainly open it up to you. We will be bringing out some new products and practices and projects and programs here in the new future from an IMC perspective. So we'll be making some announcements, but if not, you can always check the videos in this channel on YouTube. This is one of the areas we're going into, or wherever you are finding this, just check and see what's going on. It also, there's a link in the show more notes about where you can get follow-up information as well. So with that, Doug, I don't think there's any other administrative stuff we need to cover off. No, okay. And therefore, I bring us in, Doug takes us out. So what will happen is Doug will share a final thought with us. When I know he's done, I'll just say, take care, and I will move to shut down the broadcast. So Doug, you want to take us out?
I sure can. So, one of the things that we talked about here just towards the tail end of the conversation is the aspect that mentoring is becoming more and more part of being integrated into the business world a whole lot more. And in order for us as mentors to be able to support that growth and that direction, we need to be able to always be looking at what can I do to enhance my practice? What can I do to enhance my continuous learning? And what can I do to be able to tell the story of what mentoring can do for you as a person and for you as an organization? And I think if we can, I know that if we get to that place, that mentoring is going to continue its rapid growth, and the benefits are going to far outweigh the effort to get there.
Wonderful. Take care, everyone.
Take care.